Be me, Jeffrey, data analyst at some mid-sized marketing firm. Most days, I just sit there, poking at endless rows of numbers until they stop arguing with each other. I take the digital chaos of clicks, scrolls, abandoned carts, ragebacks, whatever, and turn it into pretty graphs so upper management can nod thoughtfully and pretend they get it. Not exactly the stuff childhood dreams are made of, but it keeps the rent paid and nobody bothers me unless something breaks. My workspace is basically a cluster of desks where the data guys hibernate. We're the office cryptids, headphones on, caffeine in bloodstream, quietly churning out logic while everyone else tries to look busy. For a long time, the office ran like a weird little ecosystem. Every department had its role, everyone stayed in their lane, and as long as the charts looked green instead of red, the universe stayed calm. Then, sometime last fall, the company decided to promote Judy. Judy was in the SEO department, Search Engine Optimization. Before her promotion, she was just another face in the office. Pretty quiet, did her work. Nobody really paid her much attention. But getting that little bit of power, that senior SEO strategist title, seemed to flip a switch in her brain. Suddenly, she wasn't just managing keywords. She was managing the entire office's moral compass. It started small. I was in a meeting about a new client campaign. The project lead was going over the keyword strategy. He mentioned we needed to create a master keyword list to serve as the foundation. Judy cleared her throat. It was a loud, deliberate sound that made everyone stop talking. She said that the term master was problematic and that we should consider using more inclusive language, like primary or source list. The project lead, a guy who just wanted to get through his presentation, just blinked a few times. He kind of stammered and said, sure, primary list, got it. You could feel the air go out of the room. A few of us exchanged looks. We all knew what was happening. It was the beginning of something. From that point on, Judy became the office's self-appointed language police. Every internal email, every presentation slide, every Slack message was now subject to her scrutiny. She'd reply, all to a company announcement to point out a gender-coded phrase. She once cornered one of the junior graphic designers because he used a stock photo of a man to represent a user in a mock-up. Her argument was that it reinforced the subconscious bias that technology users are male by default. The kid was just trying to finish his task before the deadline. He looked completely bewildered. Most of us in the data department just put our heads down and tried to avoid her. Our work was mostly numbers and code, so it was harder for her to find fault with it. But she tried. She once suggested that our data visualization dashboards were using aggressively masculine color palettes, too many dark blues and grays. She thought we should incorporate more pastels to create a safer visual space. My boss, a straightforward guy who cared about clarity above all else, just told her that the colors were chosen for maximum contrast and readability, as per industry best practices. She didn't like that answer. She muttered something about patriarchal best practices and walked away. This went on for a couple of months. It was annoying, but manageable. Just another layer of corporate nonsense to deal with. We learned to just nod, agree to circle back on her suggestions, and then never speak of them again. But her ambition was growing. Simple corrections weren't enough. She wanted to enact systemic change. Her new target was the HR manager. He was a nice enough guy, but completely spineless. His main goal in life was to avoid any and all conflict. If someone complained, his solution was to give them whatever they wanted to make them go away. Judy must have sensed this weakness, like a shark smells blood in the water. She started having private consultations with him in his office. We'd see her walking in there with a stack of printouts, looking very serious. After these meetings, a new, weird email would usually go out to the entire company. First, it was a memo about being mindful of unconscious bias in conversations. Then, a guide on appropriate workplace humor, which basically banned any joke that wasn't about the weather. Each email felt like another brick in a wall being built around normal human interaction. The atmosphere in the office started to change. People became more cautious, more guarded. The easy banter around the coffee machine died down. Everyone was afraid of saying the wrong thing and getting a summons from HR. The men in the office, especially, started to walk on eggshells. We were the primary source of all the problems, according to Judy's worldview. Our way of speaking, our way of sitting, our way of thinking. It was all infected with something she called toxic masculinity. She never defined what it was exactly. It was just a vague, catch-all term for anything she didn't like. One afternoon, I was in the break room with Clark, our head sysadmin. Clark was a company institution. He'd been there for over 20 years. He was a grizzled, no-nonsense guy with a coffee mug that was probably older than me. He'd seen it all. He built the company's first server rack in what used to be a janitor's closet. Clark didn't care about corporate politics. He cared about uptime, bandwidth, and whether you'd tried turning it off and on again before calling him. We were just chatting about a recent network upgrade. Judy walked in to use the microwave. She stopped and just stared at Clark. He was sitting on a stool, one leg crossed over the other, just relaxing for a minute. She looked at him and said, "Could you be more mindful of how much space you're taking up? Some of us have to navigate this common area, too." Clark slowly looked down at his legs. Then he looked back at the wide, empty path around him. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked her dead in the eye and said, "Are you having a technical issue I can assist with?" The question was so direct, so completely disconnected from her complaint, that she was speechless. She just shook her head, grabbed her lunch, and left without another word. Clark just grunted and went back to his coffee. That was Clark, unflappable, a rock of pure pragmatism in a rising tide of nonsense. But even Clark couldn't stop what was coming next. Judy's campaign with the HR manager finally reached its grand finale. One Tuesday morning, an email landed in everyone's inbox. The subject line was, "Mandatory Training Session, Fostering an Inclusive and Equitable Workplace." My stomach dropped. I knew this was her masterpiece. I opened the email. It was full of the usual corporate fluff. Synergy, proactivity, paradigm shifts. But the core of it was this. Judy herself would be leading a company-wide mandatory training session. The title of her presentation was Deconstructing Patriarchy in the Office, a workshop on identifying and mitigating toxic masculinity. It was scheduled for Friday at 3 p.m., the last 2 hours of the work week. It was mandatory for every single employee. No exceptions. A collective groan echoed through the data department. Our internal chat channel lit up instantly. "You've got to be kidding me. 2 hours of this? On a Friday? I'd rather spend the weekend debugging legacy code." I leaned back in my chair and looked over at Clark's office. He was just staring at his screen, motionless. Then, he slowly shook his head, took a deep breath, and typed something. A message from him appeared in our chat. "I survived Y2K. I survived the great server migration of 08. I'll survive this. Barely." His resignation perfectly captured how we all felt. We were powerless. It was a directive from HR, blessed by management who just wanted to seem progressive. Arguing against it would be professional suicide. You'd be labeled as part of the problem she was trying to solve. So we all just accepted our fate. The rest of the week was tense. Judy was in her element. She walked around the office like a general before a big battle. She was booking the largest conference room, coordinating with HR, and printing out thick stacks of documents. I saw a title on one of her handouts as she passed my desk, "The Male Gaze in Corporate Communications." I just sank deeper into my chair and tried to become invisible. She seemed particularly excited about educating the IT and data departments. We were, in her mind, the heart of the problem. A bunch of logic-driven guys who didn't engage with her feelings-based assertions. On Thursday, she stopped by our area. "I'm really looking forward to our session tomorrow," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think we'll have a lot of important breakthroughs. It's crucial for everyone to be there with an open mind." We all just kind of mumbled and nodded, trying not to make eye contact. The unspoken message was clear. Show up, shut up, and agree with everything I say. That night, I barely slept. It wasn't just about a boring meeting. It felt like a final exam you couldn't study for, where any answer you gave would be wrong. It was this feeling of being put on trial for something you didn't do, by a prosecutor who was also the judge and jury. The whole thing felt like a massive, pointless injustice. We weren't bad people. We were just guys trying to do our jobs. We treated our female colleagues with respect. We collaborated on projects. We helped each other out. There was no patriarchy to deconstruct. There were just deadlines to meet and problems to solve. But our reality didn't matter. Only Judy's perception of it did. Friday morning arrived. The office was quiet, eerily quiet. It felt like the day of a scheduled execution. Everyone was just trying to get through their work, counting down the hours until 3 p.m. I spent the morning running queries and updating reports, trying to lose myself in the data. The numbers were clean, logical, and objective. They didn't have hidden motives or unconscious biases. They just were. I checked the clock. 12 p.m. Lunchtime. I decided to eat at my desk. The break room felt like a social minefield. Clark walked past my desk around 1 p.m., holding his sacred coffee mug. He paused and just looked at me. "Whatever happens in there, kid," he said, his voice low. "Don't take the bait. Don't argue. Just nod. It's the only way to win." I nodded. "Got it, Clark." He gave a grim little smile and continued on his way to the server room, his natural habitat. The hours crawled by. 2 p.m., 2:30 p.m. People started to pack up their things, ready to head to the conference room as soon as the clock struck 3. Judy was already in there, setting up her laptop and projector. You could see her through the glass walls, pacing back and forth, rehearsing her lines. I took a deep breath and started to shut down my applications. It was almost time. Then, at 2:45 p.m., something strange happened. The lights in the office flickered, just for a second. My monitor went black and then turned back on. A few people murmured in confusion. On my screen, the connection to our database was broken. An error message popped up. "Cannot connect to server." I tried to ping the server. No response. That's not good. Across the room, I saw one of my colleagues trying the same thing. He shook his head. Then we heard it. A high-pitched, piercing alarm sound started blaring from Clark's office. It was a sound I'd never heard before. It wasn't a fire alarm. It was something worse. It was the sound of catastrophic failure. A red light on Clark's desk phone was flashing frantically. The main server monitoring system was screaming. In that instant, every technical person in the office knew. This wasn't a glitch. This was a meltdown. The door to the server room burst open. Clark stood there, his face pale. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of intense urgency. He didn't shout, but his voice cut through the entire office like a knife. "The primary database server is down, hard down. I have a cascading failure warning on the entire storage array." He pointed a finger that swept across our department. "Jeffrey, you, Kevin, Mike, all data analysts, in the server room, now." Then he pointed towards the IT support guys on the other side of the office. "All of you too, move." There was no hesitation. No one asked questions. We all just jumped up from our desks and ran. As I hurried past the big conference room, I saw Judy through the glass. She was staring out at the commotion, a look of annoyance on her face, as if we were all just trying to disrupt her big moment. We poured into the server room. The air was thick with the smell of hot electronics and the deafening roar of the emergency cooling fans. A bank of lights on the main server rack was completely dark. Another was flashing a terrifying pattern of amber and red. "It's the RAID controller," Clark said, already typing furiously at a terminal. "It's completely unresponsive. The whole array is offline." I'm a data guy, not a hardware guy, but I knew what that meant. The RAID array was the heart of the company. It held everything. All client data, all internal records, all active projects. If we couldn't bring it back online, the company wasn't just losing data. It was losing its ability to function. We had a massive project launching for our biggest client on Monday morning. All of the final data sets were on that server. If we couldn't deliver, the company would be in breach of contract. We were looking at millions in losses and a reputation that would be torched forever. "The backups?" someone from IT said. "What about the backups?" "The automated backup was scheduled for 3 a.m. this morning," Clark gritted out. "It failed. The log says the controller was already throwing errors then. We're working with data that's at least 24 hours old, maybe more." A cold dread washed over me. This was a full-blown, level 1, company-ending disaster. Clark looked at the team of us gathered in the cramped, loud room. "IT, I need you working on the physical hardware. Find a spare controller, get it swapped, now." "Data team." He looked at me and my colleagues. "The second they get a drive back online, I need you to mount it in safe mode. We need to run integrity checks on every single database. We need to know what's corrupted and what's salvageable. Start prepping your diagnostic scripts." There was no panic, just grim, focused determination. Every man in that room knew exactly what was at stake. Our jobs, the company's future, everything. The mandatory training, Judy, her presentation on toxic masculinity, it all evaporated from my mind. It was a trivial, ridiculous distraction from a world that had suddenly become intensely real. In the real world, there were no thought-terminating cliches or abstract theories. There were just broken machines and a very real, very urgent problem that needed to be solved by people who knew how. For the next 3 hours, that tiny, freezing server room was the center of our universe. The server room was a hive of controlled chaos. Clark was the conductor of this frantic orchestra. He was directing the IT guys as they carefully pulled the dead server from its rack, the heavy machine sliding out with a protesting squeal of metal on metal. The inside looked like a complex city of wires and circuit boards. They were working with tiny screws and delicate connectors, their brows furrowed in concentration. My team and I were huddled in a corner, laptops open, furiously writing and modifying scripts. Our job was to be ready for the moment the hardware team achieved a miracle. If they could get even one drive from the array to spin up, we'd have to be prepared to dive in and assess the damage to the data itself. We were building a triage plan for the company's digital soul. Every now and then, someone's phone would buzz with a message from a coworker outside. "What's going on? Is the network still down? Judy is getting really mad in the conference room." We ignored them. None of that mattered. At around 3:15 p.m., one of the junior marketing girls cautiously opened the server room door a crack. The blast of cold air and noise made her flinch. Excuse me? Judy sent me to find out why none of you are in the mandatory training." Clark didn't even turn around from the server chassis he was leaning over. "We're busy," he growled over the fan noise. "Close the door." The door clicked shut. We all knew that message would be delivered back to Judy, and it would not be received well. But there was a strange sense of freedom in that room. For the first time in months, we weren't walking on eggshells. We weren't worried about using the right words or managing someone's feelings. We were a team of specialists focused on a single, critical objective. Competence was the only thing that mattered. Your title, your seniority, your opinions on social issues, none of it meant anything. Can you fix the problem? That was the only question. And the only people in the company who could were all men, all in this room. Not by design, just by circumstance. That was just how the roles had been filled over the years. It was a pure meritocracy, born of crisis. Meanwhile, in the conference room, things were apparently going from bad to worse. We got the story later from some of the women who were trapped in there. Judy started her presentation at 3:00 p.m. on the dot. She stood before a room that was half empty. All the chairs reserved for the men from IT and data were vacant. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She began her speech, but the prepared text was quickly abandoned. The training session became a thinly veiled tirade against the absent men. It seems some individuals feel they are above these essential conversations, she'd said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. This coordinated absence is a textbook example of male fragility. The refusal to engage with criticism is a hallmark of toxic masculinity. She projected a slide onto the screen. It was a cartoon of a man with his fingers in his ears. The caption read, "Willful ignorance." The few women in the audience were just staring at their laps, wishing they could be anywhere else. They knew something serious was happening outside. They could hear the alarms and see the frantic activity. But Judy was in her own world, a world where the most pressing issue was the validation of her theories. She spent the next hour dissecting every perceived slight she had ever experienced in the office, reframing them as evidence of a deep-seated systemic misogyny that only she was brave enough to confront. It was less of a training and more of a public therapy session with a captive audience. Back in the server room, we were making progress. The IT team had found a compatible RAID controller in a decommissioned server. It was older, but Clark thought it might work. After what felt like an eternity, they got it installed. "Okay," Clark announced, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the freezing temperature. "Powering up the array in diagnostic mode, cross your fingers." A series of clicks and whirs filled the room as the drives began to spin up, one by one. Green lights started appearing on the status panel. Hope. "Data team, you're up," Clark commanded. We connected our laptops. The server was visible on the network, but just barely. "Get in there. Find the client database. Check the primary tables. Go." My fingers flew across the keyboard. The connection was slow, unstable, but I got in. I ran the first and most important diagnostic script, a checksum verification on the main client data table. A progress bar crawled across my screen. 10%, 30%, 70%. It felt like my heart was beating in time with the blinking cursor. Then, the result came back. "Verification complete. No errors found." I couldn't believe it. I ran it again. Same result. "The main table is intact," I yelled over the fans. "The data is clean." A wave of relief washed through the room. It wasn't a total loss. We spent the next hour meticulously checking the rest of the critical systems. We found some corruption in secondary logs and internal reporting tables, but the core client data, the company's crown jewels, was safe. We could rebuild what was broken. The disaster was averted. It was just after 6 p.m. We were exhausted, mentally drained, but we had done it. Clark started the process of bringing the main systems back online. Slowly, stability returned. The network came back up. The phones started working properly again. We were standing there, a group of tired but triumphant guys, watching the status monitors all turn from red to a beautiful, solid green. That's when the server room door opened again. It was Judy. Her face was flushed with anger. Her training session had ended an hour ago to a room of empty chairs, as the women had slipped away one by one. She had been stewing, waiting for us. "So, this is where you've all been hiding," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Decided to have a little boys' club meeting instead of participating in a mandatory company activity. I can't believe the audacity." We were all too tired to even respond. We just stared at her. She pointed a finger at Clark. "And you, Clark, as a senior employee, you should be setting an example. Instead, you led this little insurrection. This is the exact kind of toxic, exclusionary behavior I was talking about in my presentation." Before Clark could even form a reply, another person appeared in the doorway behind her. It was the CEO. He wasn't a tech guy, but he was smart enough to know when something was very wrong. He'd been getting frantic calls from the client account manager all afternoon. He looked past Judy at the bank of green lights on the server rack. He looked at our exhausted faces. A deep sigh of relief escaped him. "Clark," the CEO said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. Are we okay?" "We're okay," Clark said, his voice hoarse. "Systems are stable. The client data is secure. We were about 5 minutes away from losing everything, but the team pulled it off." The CEO closed his eyes for a moment. He looked like a man who had just been pulled back from a cliff edge. He opened them and looked at all of us. "I don't know what to say. You guys are heroes. You just saved this company. Thank you. Thank you all." Then his gaze fell on Judy, who was standing there, fuming, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation she had just walked into. The CEO's expression changed from relief to confusion. "Judy, what are you doing here?" She seized her moment. This was her chance to report our insubordination to the highest authority. "I'm here because not a single one of these men attended my mandatory diversity and inclusion training," she said, her voice filled with righteous indignation. "They deliberately ignored a company-wide directive. It was a coordinated act of defiance against our corporate values." The CEO just stared at her. He stared for a long, silent moment. You could practically see the gears turning in his head as he processed the sheer absurdity of what she was saying. He finally spoke, and his voice was dangerously calm. "Judy," he said slowly, as if explaining something to a small child, "while you were in a conference room talking about corporate values, these men were in here, working nonstop for 3 hours to prevent this company from going out of business." He gestured around the server room. "This company almost ceased to exist this afternoon. The only reason you'll have a job to come to on Monday is because of the people in this room, the people you are accusing of not being team players." Judy's mouth opened, then closed. The color drained from her face. For the first time, the reality of the situation seemed to penetrate her ideological bubble. She looked at the servers, then at our grease-stained, tired faces. She looked at the CEO's ice-cold expression, and she finally understood. She had been passionately lecturing about the water being wet while the whole house was on fire, and the people she was scolding were the only ones with a hose. The CEO wasn't finished. "Everyone in this room," he said, his voice gaining strength, "is getting a bonus, and they are all to go home immediately and rest. That's a direct order." He looked at Judy. "Your training is canceled, indefinitely. We have more important things to worry about." Without another word, he turned and left. Silence descended on the room. It was thick and heavy. We started to gather our things, not looking at her. One by one, we filed out of the server room, walking past her as she stood frozen in the doorway. I was one of the last to leave. Clark was right behind me. As he passed Judy, he paused for just a second. He didn't look at her, just stared straight ahead down the empty office hallway. He said, quietly but clearly, "There's a difference between making a point and making a difference, Judy." And then he walked away. I went home and slept for 12 hours. On Monday, the office was different. The story had spread like wildfire. No one made eye contact with Judy. She stayed at her desk all day, silent. All the memos about inclusive language and unconscious bias seemed to disappear from the company's internal servers. The atmosphere was lighter. The fear was gone. People started joking around the coffee machine again. We, the guys in the data and IT departments, weren't seen as the problem anymore. We were the guys who kept the lights on, the guys who solved real problems. We had earned a new level of respect, not by arguing or complaining, but by simply being competent when it mattered most. Judy handed in her resignation 2 weeks later. The official reason was that she was pursuing other opportunities. Nobody missed her. The whole incident taught me something. There's a world of theory, and then there's the world of reality. And when reality hits, it doesn't care about your feelings or your ideology. It just cares about whether you can fix what's broken.